National isolationism, a failed policy that brings economic hardship, military vulnerability, and diplomatic isolation. Throughout history, political leaders have promoted isolationist policies in an attempt to protect national sovereignty and distance their countries from foreign entanglements. This may sound appealing to those who view global cooperation with suspicion, but time and time again, isolationism has proven to be a self-destructive strategy. The refusal to engage with the international community brings economic stagnation, military vulnerability, and diplomatic isolation. When countries turn inward, they often find themselves weakened on all fronts. This article explores several historical examples of leaders who pursued isolationism or anti-alliance stances only to face disastrous consequences for their countries. Economic hardship, the price of isolation. When a nation closes its doors to international trade, investment, and cooperation, the results are almost always economically devastating. Modern economies are deeply interconnected, and cutting ties with global markets often means cutting off essential resources, markets, and investments. Herbert Hoover serves as a prime example of how isolationist policies can deepen economic crisis. As the U.S. president during the onset of the Great Depression, Hoover opposed significant government intervention in the economy and maintained an isolationist stance in foreign policy. His reluctance to engage with international efforts to mitigate the global depression worsened the crisis. The U.S. economy spiraled downward, leading to widespread unemployment and poverty, which cost Hoover the presidency in 1932. Similarly, Juan Perón in Argentina tried to shield his country from foreign influence through economic nationalism. He nationalized key industries and distanced Argentina from Western powers. While these policies initially seemed to empower the nation, they ultimately led to economic stagnation, inflation, and capital flight. Argentina, once one of the most prosperous nations in Latin America, fell into a long-term decline. Military vulnerability, isolationist policies. Invite aggression. Isolationism is often based on the belief that avoiding foreign entanglements will keep a country safe from conflict. However, history shows that nations that turn away from alliances and international cooperation often leave themselves vulnerable to external threats. Neville Chamberlain of the United Kingdom famously pursued a policy of appeasement in the late 1930s, believing that avoiding confrontation with Nazi Germany would secure peace. The Munich Agreement of 1938 allowed Hitler to annex parts of Czechoslovakia without any meaningful opposition. Far from avoiding conflict, Chamberlain's isolationist approach emboldened Hitler, leading to the outbreak of World War II. The United Kingdom, despite its efforts to avoid conflict, was soon embroiled in the most devastating war in history. In France, Prime Minister Edouard Daladier followed a similar policy of appeasement. Like Chamberlain, he believed that keeping France out of the growing tensions in Europe would preserve peace. However, the lack of opposition to Nazi expansion only made France more vulnerable, and the country quickly fell to German forces in 1940. When countries refuse to engage with international security structures, they lose out on critical alliances and cooperative defense measures. Isolationism may seem like a way to avoid conflict, but it often leads to greater military vulnerability. Diplomatic isolation, the loss of influence. When nations isolate themselves diplomatically, they lose the ability to shape global events and often find themselves marginalized in international affairs. Leaders who pursue isolationist policies tend to believe they are preserving their country's sovereignty, but in reality, they are ceding influence to more engaged nations. Getulio Vargas of Brazil attempted to maintain a neutral stance during the early years of World War II, hoping to balance economic ties with both the Allies and the Axis powers. However, his neutrality led to diplomatic isolation, leaving Brazil without strong allies during a time of global upheaval. Eventually, Brazil joined the Allies in 1942, but the initial period of isolation left the country economically weakened and diplomatically sidelined. Nicolae Ceausescu, the communist dictator of Romania, pursued an extreme policy of isolationism. He distanced Romania from both the Soviet Union and the West, believing this would make the country a bastion of independence. Instead, Romania became diplomatically isolated, economically stagnant, and politically unstable. Ceausescu's regime collapsed in 1989, and he was executed after years of widespread poverty and political repression. Diplomatic isolation reduces a nation's ability to influence international decisions, leaving it at the mercy of larger, more engaged powers. Without strong diplomatic relationships, countries often find themselves on the losing side of global events. Learning from history. Why cooperation matters. The lesson is clear. Isolationism is a failed policy that weakens nations economically, militarily, and diplomatically. In today's interconnected world, no country can afford to go it alone. The challenges we face, whether economic instability, climate change, or security threats, require collective action. Countries that thrive are those that engage with others, building alliances, participating in global markets, and shaping international norms. Cooperation strengthens economies, bolsters security, and ensures a voice in global affairs. As tempting as isolationist rhetoric may be, it ultimately leads to diminished power, weakened security, and economic decline. Leaders and nations should learn from the past, be smart, and work with as many people as often as possible. Global cooperation is not a weakness. It is the foundation of strength and stability in an interconnected world. By understanding the dangers of isolationism and embracing collaboration, nations can secure a prosperous and secure future for their citizens.